Okay, we're ready to go. Welcome to the second webinar of the Transforming Homes webinar series. I'm Catherine Butler. I'm Associate Professor in Human Geography at the University of Exeter. I'm part of the management team for the Transforming Homes project. I bring the social science expertise, and I have the pleasure of chairing this webinar today. We'll have two talks from our research team, Lucy McFadden and Laura Brain, who I'll introduce shortly. But I'm first going to give a very brief introduction to the Transforming Homes project for those who are new to the project here today. So we are funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council through what was called the Green Transition Ecosystems Awards. And we're a consortium of 4 universities, 6 industry and community partners, and we have an overall consortium team of approximately 50 researchers and stakeholders, with those more sort of widely involved in our collaborative networks. Our primary aim is simple. It's to transform existing 1920s to 1940s council-built housing for future generations with and for local communities in order to improve the quality of health and living experiences for residents, to reduce residential operational energy bills, and to deliver holistic, beyond net zero solutions while increasing the use of bio-based materials. Our objectives are primarily focused around developing 3 transformational processes and solutions, which are improving the architectural design and space standards, enhancing the building fabric through bio-based and non-extractive products and materials, and integrating low carbon technologies in order to lower energy demand and address carbon emissions. There are currently 1.4 million homes that were built as part of social housing development from 1920 to 1940 across the UK. These homes are therefore around 100 years old now, and although they were built very well, they were developed really for a different era. And now they require transformation to make them fit for the next 100 years, addressing those needs for low carbon housing, for housing that is also adapted to future climates, that is healthy, and that has low running costs. So we're working in the project to address these kind of wider issues through housing transformation. All our work is underpinned by a committed approach to co-design and design research methods. We're really about embedding people at the heart of the design process, incorporating diverse perspectives to develop our designs through these iterative processes where outputs and decisions from each of our engagement processes inform our further design research. By doing this, we aim to create designs that are not only technically and environmentally appropriate, but also socially and economically relevant. A significant part of our project is focused on and informed by live transformation of 6 demonstration homes in Bristol and Swansea. These are being co-designed with residents and wider stakeholders in order to understand, explore, and apply our research in practice and in these sort of real-world contexts. From this, we're aiming to develop knowledge and understanding that can both create and inform positive impacts more widely in housing transformations. And we see this happening across these different areas listed here. So by improving the quality and the lifetime of the existing housing stock, by enabling improvements in internal space and layouts, by increasing the use of bio-based materials within housing transformation, by reducing energy bills and addressing fuel poverty, by reducing carbon emissions, and by providing evidence for the benefits of collaboration and engagement between residents and stakeholders. And it's this last point that we'll be focusing on in the webinar today, with talks showcasing the types of engagement work that we've been doing and its benefits for successful housing transformation. So to introduce today's webinar, we're focusing on putting people at the heart of housing transformation and the importance of involving and engaging communities within processes of transformation. We'll have talks from Lucy McFadden, who is a research fellow within the Transforming Homes project based at University of Exeter, and from Laura Brain, who is also Research Fellow within Transforming Homes, but based at Cardiff University. I'll also introduce Louise King, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, but is one of our research fellows based at University of Bath and has been involved in developing the webinar. But Lucy has heroically stepped in to cover the part that she would have delivered. So just to shout out Louise as well. First, we're going to have Lucy talking about how we've been doing co-design really across the life of the Transforming Homes project. And she'll be providing examples of kind of what we've been doing and what its implications have been for the design of transformations. Then Laura will talk about the resources and the approaches that we've been creating and using for those engagement processes and how they've developed over time, in ways that support effective engagement of different groups. Then we're going to go back to Lucy finally to talk about engaging people within the actual delivery of housing transformation through local trade teams as another way of engaging and involving people directly in transformation. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Lucy for that first talk. And I'll be here once the presentations are done to take questions. So please do pop your questions in the Q&A as we talk today. And I'll be monitoring that, ready to pick them up once the talks are finished. Okay, over to Lucy.
Thanks, Kat. So I'm going to start by giving a quick overview of the co-design and engagement we've been doing across the life of the project. As Kat said, some of you might have heard a bit of this stuff before, so we'll go along to some of the newer research we've been doing in the second half. But just to start, so the driving principle of co-design in the project is that how we design and deliver transformation matters just as much as the changes that we make to the kind of fabric of homes or the technology of homes. So currently retrofit can seem like it's done to residents, and our approach seeks to do retrofit with, by and for communities. So it's a bottom-up, community-led approach rather than top-down. So resident and stakeholder engagement and co-design has been a thread running through all elements of our research. It's at the heart of the demonstration home process, as Kat mentioned. You can see here it's taking place through the design of transformation, through the procurement process, through the delivery, which is what I'll be talking about with the trade teams in a minute, and we'll be doing kind of reflections to see the impacts of this at the end of the process. This is not just consultation beforehand and surveys, it's taking lots of different forms, so in-depth interviews, co-design workshops, and establishing and working with a community delivery team. Co-design's also been a core element of the design research strand of our work, where we've been travelling to Interborough estates across the country, learning from residents, and now we're taking those learnings out into stakeholders, and then we'll be going all the way back round and talking to residents again over the next year or so. So just to give you an idea of where we began, the first thing we kind of did was get a real understanding of residents' experiences of their homes, their experiences of living in homes, their experience of past renovations, and this has all been really crucial in shaping our design and delivery process. So before we started anything, we spent almost over an hour in all the demonstration homes we were working with, understanding how residents use spaces, any issues they were facing, their memories and past experiences of homes. And one thing these interviews really highlighted and helped us understand was the importance of involving people in design decisions. You can see this example here, a resident who refused future works because of the way works were done the first time around. So she just didn't like the trunking of this carbon monoxide alarm, of this electricity, and refused future works to do a carbon monoxide alarm. So too often when we don't account for resident experiences and them being part of the process, people don't feel like their homes are respected, and this can lead to not participating in changes, even if in this case these can have direct impacts on well-being, on health, on the future of people's homes. So getting people involved in the process has been crucial to ensure designs that we create are actually used and taken on board by residents. It's not just understanding resident experience, but it's also ensuring that residents are part of a design process. So we've been hosting a series of workshops where we've developed lots of tools like models and retrofit cards to work with residents in our demonstration homes to understand the issues, create collective understanding of problems that people are facing, and come up with collective solutions. So this has been really important in kind of de-individualizing issues that residents might be facing, taking the burden off individual actions and actually saying, you know, this is a collective problem and we can come up with collective solution. And this has been a crucial part of making designs work for people and for communities and creating kind of shared experiences and moving towards shared futures. Finally, we've also been speaking to residents in estates across England and Wales, not just those in demonstration homes. We recognise that those two sites in Bristol and Swansea we work with can't give us the whole picture of these kind of 1.4 million homes across the UK. And we want to design solutions that are transferable to other estates. So we've been going across the country, speaking to residents, hosting one-day-long workshops based around models where residents begin by building their homes, sharing with us how their homes are constructed by making a physical model of their home, mapping their homes, communicating some of the issues they face, some of the great things about their home that they want to keep, and then transforming their home. So telling us what they think changes could be that would make their life better. And then they bring these models together to transform their street. So thinking about this collective future again. So that has been the kind of a very, very brief overview of a bunch of the co-design workshops we've been doing over the past 2 years. And now I'm going to pass over to Laura, who's going to start by talking a bit how we're developing these charrette resources with stakeholders more recently. Thanks, Laura.
Okay, thanks, Lucy. So as Lucy has just said, I'm going to talk a bit more about the latest design work that we've been doing with those who are working mostly within the housing sector. We're using the term charrettes for these. They're basically design-based interactive workshops. And so just to say, this is kind of the next stage of the process, really. So bringing in the voices of those who are working in the industry and who are the people delivering these changes to homes. And as Lucy talked about, we've worked quite extensively with residents to understand their homes and what works and what doesn't, and their ideas for transformation. And so all of that work is fed into what we're calling the Transforming Homes Design Catalogue, which one of the key outputs from this part of the project. So we're aiming to bring together all of the knowledge we're generating across the whole of the Transforming Homes project into a resource for those involved in the design and delivery of housing transformation, which we'll talk about a lot more in the next webinar in this series. So one thing to say about the charrettes is that they're based around kind of physical model making. So we've been using scale models of interwar homes as a common language to communicate design ideas, which is something that works really well with all different groups of people and gives a real kind of focus to the sessions, and particularly because it's this kind of fun and tactile and interactive way of working, it's been really effective in engaging people with design work in particular. And so these are some of the models that some of the residents produced in the resident charrettes that we held across the UK. And so I'm going to talk a bit about how we've adapted the methods and resources that we've used for those resident charrettes now to gather input from those wider groups, so people involved in delivery. So we're going to refer to them as stakeholders, but it's people from all across the kind of retrofit and housing industry. So just a bit of background, our research has indicated that there are 3 most common types of interwar social homes, which have been the basis of these models that we're using for the workshops. We've designed and made these kind of laser cut flat packs of these 3 key types, whereas the residents assembled and adapted these models themselves based on their own homes to talk to us about what their homes are like and what the differences are between these kind of archetypal homes and their own homes. We know that the stakeholders don't live in these homes, so they worked in groups instead and were each provided with a pre-assembled model of one of these house types. And whereas the residents in those charrettes talked to us about their own homes and their experiences of living there, we provided stakeholders with scenarios which are drawn from our work with residents and other people involved in transformation of housing and interval housing in particular. And so these scenarios were used as the basis for the stakeholders to respond to when transforming their model homes, to kind of put them in the shoes of people who are living in these homes. We also developed this worksheet, which allowed the charrettes to be a lot more self-led and therefore require a lot fewer facilitators. And these worksheets also capture a lot of the information from the charrettes, which is really helpful when we then take all of that away to analyse it and feed it into the wider research. As you'll see, these worksheets include a bingo sheet of kind of suggested solutions, which we're calling components, which are drawn from our co-design work and all of the design work that we've done since. And those act as a prompt for people to kind of think about what solutions might be appropriate for these homes, but also have blank spaces for participants to add anything they thought that we've missed on there. And we'll cover more about the kind of components for transformation in the webinar next week. Yeah, and so we tested these resources and methods at 3 different events across the spring of this year, with 3 quite different groups of practitioners and people involved in housing transformation and the housing industry. So the first of these was at the Design Museum in London, where we invited quite a varied group of people who were all from different kind of organisations, targeted for like a real spread of different expertise and different input. And this was quite a small event that was hosted by Transforming Homes project. And yeah, it was really interesting in that it brought together quite varied people from different organisations and different areas of kind of retrofit and housing. The second one was part of a symposium hosted by Newcastle University, and this was really academics and practitioners, so architecture, planning practitioners and researchers who obviously offered quite a different perspective. And then the last of these was by far our largest, with the members of the National Housing Maintenance Forum, most of whom are involved directly in kind of repair and transformation maintenance of social housing across the UK. And so one of the really useful things about having these workshops is that they allowed us to iteratively develop and test our resources. So we learned from each event and gathered and analysed all the feedback that we got from those different audiences, and then adapted all of our resources and our processes based on that. So by the time of our last charrette, we felt that the toolkit of resources was working really successfully to gather all the input that we were looking for as a project from this really diverse range of industry stakeholders. But something that we also found out was that although we've been doing this for the research and for the project, there's far wider benefits to some of these workshops, this kind of interactive way of working. So we found that the charrettes were a really effective and memorable way to engage industry stakeholders with the project and to disseminate everything that we'd learned so far. And it also allowed us to it allowed people to put themselves in the shoes of residents. And so those in decision-making positions kind of started to see these homes from quite a different perspective, which was very interesting. And also it was really great tool for team building and cross-industry collaboration. So it sparked lots of conversations and discussion between people involved in all different areas of housing transformation. And as they were working as teams, they'd then work together to come up with solutions for these homes, bringing together all the different expertise, which was really interesting. So we're planning more of these events as well as further resident events, and we're really keen that people involved in this area can input into these tools and also use them in their own engagement and design processes. So we'll have some more information at the end of the presentation about how to get in touch if you're keen to be involved. Okay, now I'll pass back to Lucy to talk about trade teams.
Thanks, Sora. Yes, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're engaging those people who are directly involved in delivering transformation and delivering works in the transformation process through our establishment of a local trades team at the Bristol demonstrator site. So just to kind of show you where this fits in, because as we're talking about lots of different things that are happening across the project in different ways. So this is part of the demonstration homework in Bristol, and we have established a local trade team. We Can Build Together in collaboration with We Can Make. And Laura's just been talking about the design research bit at the bottom there. So to start with, there are a few key principles and defining features that we thought about when establishing the trade crew in Bristol that have made it a really important part of what making it work in the way it does. First of all, it's a neighbourhood trade crew made up of local tradespeople and Andover Road residents. So that's people who live on the estates that we're researching, as well as members as well as people who live in the homes that we're doing work on and live on the street that we're doing work on. So it's really very much place-based, very local experience and connection to place. We have recruited people with a range of experience and skills. So this ranges from apprentices with no experience working alongside people who run their own construction trades businesses. So we're pairing in the trade team, we pair an apprentice with an experienced tradesperson, and that's part of the learning process of the crew. Thirdly, a real key element of the trade crew has been fostering inclusive site culture. So we've recruited team members from groups traditionally underrepresented in trades, and there have been really important work in building inclusive site practices into working days. So things like check-ins, reflective sessions, lunch together, kind of ways that we can kind of overcome perhaps some of the challenges and individualization that is associated sometimes with site culture. And all of this is looking to create local future-proof jobs in retrofit and encourage the use of bio-based materials. So a lot of the tradespeople we recruited hadn't had experience of working with bio-based materials. So part of the learning from, apprentices up to experienced tradespeople has been learning about how to use bio-based materials in a local kind of small-scale trade crew. So how have we as researchers been gathering data and reflecting these learnings back into the process? We started off by kind of doing semi-structured interviews with everyone in the trade crew to understand their previous experience, their skills, and importantly, kind of their expectations. What were they hoping would be done differently, maybe in this kind of trade crew? Because we're really trying to emphasize, we want to challenge some of the things that you found challenging in past sites, and how can we do that? What does that look like? And then we also have been undertaking weekly reflective diaries over the whole course of the work, and these have been really invaluable insights into kind of how the nitty-gritty of how the trade team are working with bio-based materials, how they're working through problems, how they're learning on the job, as well as how the team is developing, how residents are involved in the process and decision making, and of course challenges that come with this. And that's been a really reflexive process. So we kind of send that back to the trade team every week, and they can then reflect on okay, what are we all learning? What are we coming up against? And for example, after phase one, there was okay, we need a bit more kind of retrofit theory. We need a bit more of the why are we doing this? Why does this need to be sealed? Because, you're telling me to do this specification, but if I know why I'm doing that, then I'm much more likely to kind of adhere to it. So we're kind of learning as we go and building that into the trade team process. And finally, we've been bringing the team together, as I said, in workshops to examine challenges and opportunities and reflect on working with bio-based materials. So we had a really useful workshop about kind of what's it been like working with bio-based materials, the challenges around kind of working with materials that are maybe less readily available. So if you do run out of something, there's a longer wait time, how are we working through that as a neighbourhood trade crew? So key findings. First of all, working the trade team and working with residents is a relational process experienced through negotiation, communication, and collective problem solving between the trade crew, residents, and the wider community. You can see here how residents and trade crew were kind of negotiating times and hours in thinking about younger children, There's examples of trade crew members who live on the street talking to their neighbours, telling them, learning across kind of like, oh, what are you doing there? That's really interesting. That's something I'm experiencing in my house too. Kind of building this relational element to trades. And then the next key finding is that care and respect is a really important element of the trade crew work. They're continually responding to resident routines and needs, and this is in kind of collaboration with fixed technical specifications. So there's an example of one resident who really, really valued the storage space in her loft, and we had to kind of negotiate. Okay, so may you lose a slightly on thermal performance to keep that storage, and how do we, as a research project and in collaboration with residents who live in homes and who we want to put at the forefront of designs, negotiate this and come up with solutions that make the best of both. And finally, there's been a real connection between retrofit works and wider values of social purpose and care. So retrofit was framed in this way by many members of the trade crew who connected their work to wider values of care and social purpose. So it's really been meaningful, not only for kind of like the meaningfulness for the residents, but it's also really helped the trade team find meaning in their work and social purpose in the work they're doing, working in this kind of inclusive relational way. And some other further key finding is that learnings were developed through hands-on embodied experiences and informal problem solving, and practices were continually adapted as the team refined more effective ways of working. This is particularly the case with kind of bio-based materials that the team members weren't kind of familiar with. There was a constant kind of learning from one another on the job, and it's really interesting to see how that embodied experience is coming through in the diaries. Collaboration has allowed flexibility, but it's also exposed coordination challenges, highlighting the need for clear roles and communication. Obviously, there's challenges, as I kind of pointed out, between expectations of the project in terms of insulation and what residents need, and that's kind of been something that we've been really working hard to balance between on-site in a way that's reflexive and is kind of emerging as the team happens. So that's a real kind of a real benefit to having a smaller team who we can kind of mold through the process. The project really strengthened team culture. There's a lot of confidence built, more collaborative ways of working coming out. Many tradespeople reflected, that how they would often find themselves quite isolated on site, and here they kind of really feel like collaborating, and they're really learning new skills that they feel they can take to the next site and build their confidence and be a mentor to future people. And just to wrap up, our hope is that the trade team model established in Bristol can be a starting point for thinking about how to establish place-based retrofit trade crews in other places. And obviously this won't look the same everywhere, but we've kind of been building up processes and systems for supporting and establishing similar crews in other places. This includes kind of identifying barriers that might exist to establishing local trades crews and overcoming these. So how kind of smaller scale trade crews can use bio-based material, where do you store them? What are the kind of challenges with this? What do you do about supply chains when you're kind of trying to be reflexive, but also working in longer timeframes when you're looking at delivery times and things like that? And also, obviously, learning about fostering inclusive site culture. So how these practices are working, evidence of the impact of these more inclusive site practices, and embedding reflective learning and training processes into the work. And you can see there that kind of abundance on the whiteboard. The trade crew have been doing this thing called abundance, where if a resident's like, oh, bloody hell, my dishwasher's just broken, can you help me? They're on site and they say, right, well, I think we can find half an hour today to have a look at that, and it kind of fosters this idea that this is more about a kind of relational interactive thing, and not just I'm here to do a job, that job is fixed. It does not change, and it's really been an amazing part of kind of making this feel like it's part of community rather than somebody coming into your home.
on all of that, we're really interested to hear from any of you out there who want to kind of be involved in the project, and also to kind of find out more about some of the things that are coming out of it too. So just to say, stay in touch. There's plenty of ways to do that. We've got the Transforming Homes website where you can also sign up for the newsletter, and then there's a couple of an email address, and I think I've also got a LinkedIn page there for you to get in touch. And then last but not least, that we have the third webinar in this series next week, which is going to talk a bit more about the Transforming Homes design catalogue that came up a few times in this webinar as well. So I think that's about it for now, and I'll hand back to Kat. Thank you very much.
Thanks both, that was great. Really interesting to hear the sort of project and the engagement work that we've been doing across the project encapsulated there. I had a couple of things I thought I could raise just to kick us off as kind of points of discussion. I thought it might be interesting, Laura, just to go back to your presentation, to give an example of how the charrettes and the learning from the charrettes has been feeding into our designs. Just to give one example to kind of sort of give a bit of insight into how those things translate. So
yeah, of course.
Sorry, not to put you on hugely.
No,
put you on the
that's
spot.
fine. There was one that I was talking to someone about the other week, actually, which we found in a lot of the resident engagement workshops that the vast majority of people that the participants in those resident engagement sessions had pets who were really important to their households. And there was a lot raised about these homes not really having many buffer spaces between the outdoors and the indoors, and it being quite a difficult thing to keep the spaces tidy and clean if you had pets who were coming straight into your kitchen all the time and things. So I think one of the in that bingo sheet that I showed, one of those components was looking at kind of buffer spaces and adding kind of porches or small utility spaces by slightly tweaking the layouts of the homes to give people the opportunity to have a messy space to clean off and therefore improve the quality of life of the whole of their kind of downstairs. It's kind of, yeah, interesting things like that, which can be quite specific to a house type, in that these weren't designed perhaps at a time when pets came into homes quite as much, and so it's not something that was necessarily thought of in that way. There are so many of them. There's so many really valuable insights that came out of those co-design sessions, but just
Great, that was really helpful. And then for Lucy, I was wondering from the trade crew work, and I think you can speak to this, if there were kind of learnings that you thought could be applied in other contexts, so not necessarily in the specific kind of trade crew context, but in other kind of retrofit contexts, that there might be things that were transferable in a way that's less direct. I was thinking about what you were saying about kind of care, and that struck me as something that could be really like applied more widely as a sort of more general learning. So I was just wondering about if you could reflect on if there were sort of other learnings that could be for other sort of teams, building teams that are working on retrofit.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think definitely like finding that space for the teams themselves to kind of reflect on what's going on, because I think sometimes you might go into kind of works and you have a very strict timeline, and you don't necessarily always find that space built into the work for like kind of very open, reflective, conversational moments. And that's been really useful because we have that privilege maybe as researchers as well to have that space. And I think sometimes you don't necessarily realize how useful that can be in refining processes later, because you have to just get onto the next job, which is totally understandable. But I think that could definitely be something that is taken into kind of wider retrofit and transformation processes, is that kind of ongoing learning and reflective processes built into the daily work and time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. Great. We've got some questions coming into the Q&A now. So I'm going to do one that's more for Laura first. Just say, thank you. The charrettes activity sounds amazing as a learning method. Could you explain a bit more about the process? Were they already assembled, the models, or did the residents assemble them? Did they physically add retrofit measures? So did they add solar panels, or did they indicate on like a sheet the changes that they would like? Were they working in groups or individually? So could you just explain a bit more about the process of the charrettes?
Yeah, of course. And maybe I can just share a slide again. One thing to say is that the charrettes that we did with residents were much longer than the ones that we did with stakeholders. So we took a whole day over doing the resident ones, which gave us this opportunity where they could build the models themselves. So they got given the kind of template model and they put that together. And as they did that, would start kind of showing us how their homes actually differed from these kind of standard archetypes as well, because we know lots of alterations have been made to them and that they were interpreted slightly differently in different places, for example. So that was really valuable. So they put these models together themselves, and then the next stage they kind of put these flags in to talk about how they use their homes and the things that they liked and the things that they struggled with in their homes. And then in the kind of afternoon of the session, they got completely free rein to transform them in whatever way they wanted. So these early charrettes, we didn't have kind of prompts in the same way as the later ones for things that people should do to their homes. We really wanted to open it up and see what was important to these residents. And I think one of the things to say is that this project is really looking kind of beyond retrofit. So we're trying not to kind of limit it to things like, you know, solar panels or insulation, but actually to look at space and look at layouts and look at the way that homes are used as well. So you can see in this image, somebody has added some solar panels, but they've also kind of put an extension on, and they've talked about a fruit cart as a way to kind of bring the community together. And so there's all sorts of interesting things that came out of letting people have free rein on that. Yeah, and I think for the resident ones, just everyone was working individually, and partly that was kind of gathering information about these homes and who lived in them, and letting them kind of create their own model homes. For the stakeholder ones, people worked in groups, which had a lot of different benefits. So yeah, there are quite a few differences between the resident ones and the stakeholder ones. It's quite yeah, quite difficult to maybe get around your head around that in a half-hour presentation, but we're always happy to talk more about that as well. So, thanks, Neil.
That's great. And okay, to the question from Jess Bresson, just interested in the importance of adaptability in delivery. So were there any challenges in the relationships between the trades and the residents in terms of their expectations, negotiation, listening to one another? Did the co-design approach explicitly include processes to support working through those differences? So that's for you, Lucy.
Yes, yeah, that's a really great question, which is like really interesting because it's definitely been part of the process, as it always would be. So for example, I spoke about abundance, which was a really important thing of kind of like, you know, doing some extra jobs if and when needed. And there probably at some points was a bit of tension between, you know, I've got to complete my job as a tradesperson within a certain time, and I'm also being asked to do these extra jobs, and kind of balancing the kind of the need to complete the works on the table and doing extra works. And so kind of part of the reflective sessions we did was reflecting on this, you know, is it working? How do we establish boundaries about what abundance can be within the kind of life of this project, for example? And so kind of check-ins and diaries were a part of the like process that allowed for that to happen like on site weekly, and that whiteboard you saw kind of was keeping track of the different jobs that perhaps needed to be done on top of the work. So that was a kind of visible reminder not only to the trade crew but to residents, so everyone could see the works kind of on the table for that week and understand what people had to achieve. And yeah, it's really interesting. And also just to say, you know, some tradespeople are residents and in this trade crew, which is another really interesting interaction of kind of like, how do you manage people who are perhaps themselves crossing that boundary between, you know, I don't go home at the end of the day, this is my home, or this is my street. I don't go home from my street. So that's been a really interesting element of the work, which I think has been part of kind of just working through it, using reflective sessions, using weekly check-ins, using the like longer workshops to kind of share what's going on in the process. I hope that answers it, that kind of.
That's great. We've got a few more on the trade crew now, so brace. So Shenfei is asking, could you just say a bit more about how the trade crew were recruited, which I think could be interesting just to flesh out what you were saying there as well, and which and how underrepresented groups were involved.
Yes, just for that, just to say that we as researchers didn't recruit the trade crew ourselves. It was We Can Make who recruited them. So I don't want to take credit for doing the kind of recruitment or anything like that. But my understanding is that they were recruited kind of from the street. So people who are already engaged in the project, or so people, residents engaged in the project, neighbours engaged in the project. As well as kind of opening it up to these underrepresented groups. So, for example, I know that it was shared with kind of a queer tradespeople group. So there's lots of like women and non-binary workers who perhaps are not always perhaps underrepresented on site, and that was a kind of important principle. And there's also quite a few of the trade crew who have existing connections to Knowle West, even if they don't live there. So, you know, we grew up in Knowle West. So I think that was another important consideration of like an understanding of the estate. So in the recruitment process.
That's great. Thanks. Okay, so from Joel, could you talk a bit more about how some of the trade crew principles and ideas will be translated when working with local authorities who already have existing retrofit schemes? So it's kind of, I guess, similar to the question I was asking at the beginning, but more focused on how can some of this be translated into local authorities and their approaches specifically?
Very interesting question, Joel. And I think that's something we will be doing at the Swansea case site. And we are in the process of kind of figuring out how some of the kind of reflective processes, for examples, can be translated to a council trade. A trade team, is it a council tradespeople who might work in very different ways? So, for example, this trade we're very specifically on these homes for a long period, so it's easy to collect diaries, but we're having to work out kind of like who we might need to collect reflections from in that different process. But I think also we are really seeing how kind of learning about, for example, the theory behind why you're doing the works has been really invaluable to not only to make sure the works are kind of meeting quality standards, but it's been really invaluable to the trade crew themselves. So that's definitely something we can translate across. And we've also been seeing, like, for example, people were working with hemp insulation in lofts, and the crew were really reflecting how their health felt significantly better cutting hemp as it did kind of working with fiberglass. So like the principle of working with bio-based materials, we're already learning that can actually have like direct benefits for trade crew and how they feel about working with materials and feeling that kind of tangible materials.
I just put my hand up because I realised in this presentation we haven't given a lot of context about the two different demonstration projects that are going on as part of the project. So there's demonstration homes being delivered in Bristol alongside the trade team that you've seen some information about today, and We Can Make the community organisation involved with that. And then we've also got homes that are being having works done to them in Swansea. So we've got 4 demonstration homes in Swansea where we've also been engaging the residents and working really closely with Swansea Council, who are the stockholders of those homes, to kind of develop kind of beyond their business as usual retrofit schemes to see particularly how we can bring in kind of bio-based materials into some of their retrofit schemes that are going on across their stock of around 14,000 homes. And it's really interesting looking at different delivery models for those, because Swansea have an in-house team and they're very established, very experienced in delivering retrofit, and seeing actually what their experience is of working with these bio-based materials and these different ways of working, and how that compares to kind of conventional retrofit. And WSA, WSA, who are one of the universities involved in the project, Cardiff University, have worked with Swansea Council for quite a long time, and actually a lot of the work that we've done together has kind of influenced some of their retrofit and some of their new build schemes as a council. So I think it's something really valuable in looking at those different delivery models as well for retrofit and the different scales of that.
Nice. Yeah, this kind of relates to Rachel's question, which is in, I'm going to do in two parts because I feel like there's quite a lot in there. So firstly, Rachel's asking what are the reflections of tradespeople and residents respectively of working with each other in the trade crews. So we do that part first, and then I'll talk about the other bits.
It's really interesting. There's definitely some like work that is being done and needs to be done around kind of boundaries. So just recognizing that, for example, people who don't live on the street and don't live in the houses go home at the end of the day, and that's very much their right. They're being paid for their hours, but some people don't go home. It is their home. So there's that difference where you shift between, you know, there's a bit of mess in the front garden left behind. If you went home from your job, you wouldn't necessarily see that every day. But if you are the tradesperson and the resident, then you see that. And so it's like keeping on top of that and making sure that actually people who work as tradespeople and our residents aren't being left to do that work every day and feeling like they're still there. So they have to kind of stay longer or finish jobs. And that's been something that we've been really attentive to. And I think it's been really valuable, and people have been really kind of really excited to kind of work in a different way than perhaps they're used to. Those people that perhaps worked more traditionally in trades and have been working solo have really taken to the community process. Have kind of, I know that members of the trade crew are now, when the work's kind of paused for a week, are now working with each other on separate jobs. So kind of expanding out onto that kind of taking onto site.
Rachel's kind of interested in how trade people who, you know, are in small businesses, micro businesses, how their kind of experiences of working with people that actually have very limited or only tacit experience, and I guess the extra work that encompasses for them. And she's saying, you know, especially when it's often difficult for micro businesses to take on apprentices, let alone those that don't have any skills or don't have or have very little kind of skills or experience. And then she's kind of asking, were there prospects for residents to become apprentices and continue with their training as well as part of this, or how that's being sort of managed within this process?
So I think probably a lot of the credit for that needs to go to kind of We Can Make, who are a really established community organisation in Knoll West, and they've been able to be that kind of overarching organisation, I suppose, who are able to almost host a retrofit training exercise that perhaps a micro business wouldn't be able to do on their own, which helps apprentices get up to speed and doesn't put the burden on the micro businesses or like the smaller tradespeople. They've been able to kind of think about how we roll these changes out into wider houses. And I think that they've kind of allowed that kind of local structure, which really helps the trade crew to be supported locally and doesn't put the burden on the trades people themselves. And in terms of what the prospects for residents become apprentices, residents are apprentices, at least two that I know of, and they are we're still in the midst of the project, so it's not over. But that's very much part of the kind of ongoing work that we're doing. I know, for example, one resident who is an apprentice is now working with it's her husband and her who are working, and now she's working for her husband's business, so she's becoming part of the family business as a result of kind of doing this training. So there are prospects at the moment within the existing kind of tradespeople's companies, but beyond the project is still to be seen. Does that make sense?
And yeah, it does. That's great. And the final part, how might this tie to social value for procurement for larger scale retrofit programs? So Laura might be able to comment on this one as well.
It's a very good question. I'm afraid I don't think I have a particularly good answer to it, because I think that's something that we'd really like to find out through the project. So I think the bit of work that Louise, who sadly couldn't join us today on this webinar, is that's kind of looking at different delivery models and how we bring more of this kind of these different ways of working into these broader retrofit programs and other kind of areas of housing transformation as well, because I think it's also looking at ways that we can link up some of the quite disparate parts of large scale housing transformation. It's a really nice thing about the project that we are working at all these different scales, and that there's a lot that one can learn from another as well. I think there's probably knowledge transfer in both directions, and one large part of the project that's focusing on that. And I think if you wanted to send an email or something, then I bet Louise would probably be the person to talk to about that. So.
Lucy, do you want to come in on that one, just to reflect on how the learnings from the trade crew and how that relates to kind of, or how it might tie to social value in procurement for larger scale programs?
I think there's definitely a piece about kind of how within the larger kind of larger delivery teams, there's space to have these smaller local trade crews kind of brought on board in some way, and how we kind of make sure that those smaller kind of relationships are able to maybe be brought into the bigger umbrella organizations, because they are really valuable, and they can then later perhaps absorb them or foster kind of more local trade work practice, and helping kind of smaller businesses be Trustmark approved under that kind of banner and things like that.
Yeah, this is probably the last question, because we've only got 5 minutes remaining, and it's a very nice one. Fiona Gleed is noting that Knoll in Bristol has a really good community centre and a good community infrastructure that some other council estates have lost. And she's asking, was this important in the selection of the areas to study and or important in achieving the community charrettes?
One of the things that we have found, actually, all of the estates that we have worked with have had really strong community centres, and we have actually chosen to do the charrettes themselves at community centres, so that it feels like a place that people are quite comfortable coming and feels embedded within those communities. And I think the whole process of arranging those charrettes was really helped by spaces with really strong kind of community infrastructures too. And so it's actually a really good question, and something for us to reflect on as well, that how would we work with estates that maybe didn't have such strong community infrastructures, and how would we kind of get in touch with the people and make sure that their voices are heard on the project as well, because there probably is some bias in the ones that we have managed to kind of get these charrettes up and going with are the ones where there have been enthusiastic people in the community who are keen to make it happen and to work with us. So yeah, it's a really good question. I think there were kind of obviously quite rigorous criteria for selecting some of the places that we held those charrettes, and it was really about trying to get quite a broad range of context and a broad range of different demographics to those, because we know that this type of housing does vary all across the UK. but there have been some other things, like we haven't managed to work with really small estates yet because they don't necessarily have that kind of infrastructure or just the sheer quantity of people that we can get a big enough group together to do this sort of thing. So one last thing to say is that Swansea, who we've been working with as well, and we've done lots of work with, the residents there, has this incredible community centre who have been really, really supportive all the way through, and are even kind of hosting some of our other events and things. So that's been really nice.
Yeah, great. Lucy, do you want to come in and have the last word?
I was going to say the short answer is yes, definitely. And like, I think probably one of the findings from our project should be, you know, the importance of like long-term institutions, social institutions like community centres for supporting like transformation and like housing transformation, not just kind of your usual actors, but these kind of community level institutions are really important.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think we'll draw it to a close there. With 2 minutes remaining, so it's just left for me to promote the next webinar and to say thank you to everybody today. So thank you for joining us. Thanks to all those who asked questions and engaged in the discussion. Especially, obviously, thanks to Lucy and Laura for delivering your excellent presentations. We've got a couple of things that Veronica has just posted in the chat for us. Our next webinar is in a week's time on the 16th of July at 1 p.m. and that is going to be focused on developing the Transforming Homes Design Catalogue. A bit more of the technical side of things as well, and in terms of the design work we've been doing in that one. So please do join us for that next one, and you can keep up to date. You can get in touch with us through all the methods we mentioned earlier and which Veronica has now posted in the chat. So please do. Okay, thanks very much, everybody.